Viral debrief. Coming up. Hey 7-4 crew, welcome back. If you don't know me, my name's Kelsey. I'm a 747 pilot. My channel, 7-4 Gear, is all about aviation. Now I can't thank all of you in the 7-4 crew enough for continuing to send me these videos. You guys have scoured the internet and continue to send these in, and I can't thank you enough for that. I appreciate all of you very much. If you have a video that you think would be good for this series, the two easiest places to send them to me is the free form, 74gear.com, or my Instagram. Let's get into it. Something that all of you don't know is that the guy who edits these videos, Mike, is about to head off to flight school. And one of the first pieces of advice that I got given when I went out to start flight school was from a guy who had like 2,000 hours, which at the time I had maybe like 3 hours, so it sounded like he had 1 million hours. But one of the things that he told me about was, hey, in the event that you have an engine failure, here's some tips of what to do and here's what not to do. So hopefully Mike, as he edits this video, will take my advice as he goes through flight school, and hopefully he doesn't have this problem of an engine failure, which is what I think happened here. But if he does, that he follows this advice so that way he can continue to edit these videos for all of you. And right here, it sounds like right when the engine started to fail. Now, instinctively as a pilot, what you want to do in the case of an emergency is land, right? You're going to want to land, and you want to land at the safest possible place. And most people will think, well, I want to get on a runway. That thing is built for airplanes, so that's where I want to put my airplane. That's all that I know how to land on, so that's where I want to get to. The problem is in doing that, in making that effort to get back to the runway, sometimes you put yourself in a more dangerous situation than if you landed off-field. Now, I should clarify, this applies to a single engine, which is what I believe this is, a single engine aircraft. If you're on a commercial aircraft and you lose an engine, the pilots have done a ton of training. I do training on that at least once a year in the simulator, not in an actual plane, but we do the training for that. In your typical commercial aircraft can easily handle having an engine failure even before takeoff and can still get up in the air, fly back around and land. So that doesn't apply for a commercial aircraft, but if you're on a plane with only one engine and you lose that engine, well, you're kind of limited on your options. The other thing that I want to point out here is it looks like they're drifting from the center of the runway, which is a terrible habit to be in, but I used to do it in flight school as well. But look how far left of the runway they are from where they started at the beginning of this video. The reason why that's important is because that if in the event that you lose an engine at, let's say, 20 feet on a small plane like this, usually you can drift right back down and you're right in the middle of the runway. You don't need to bank your plane over to get towards the runway. You can just drift down and settle down and roll off. And even if you roll off the end of the runway at 10 or 20 knots, you're going to be a lot better off than if you go down in the grass at 80 knots. So from this point here, he'd have to make an aggressive bank back to the runway, assuming there was more runway to land on. Now, I've actually seen a pilot do this in real life. I was already a commercial pilot at the time. I was doing charters, and a guy, we were on a long runway. It was a really long runway. I saw them take off and then get about 10 or 15 feet in the air, and then they landed, and then they taxied back in. I don't know what was wrong, but because he was right in the middle runway, it was not really a big deal. He was able to just land right back down on the runway, and control, or the tower was saying like, are you okay? Is everything all right? Now, at the end of the day, he got cleared for takeoff, and he didn't get cleared for landing, but it's better to land if he had some type of a problem, which is what I'm guessing happened, and he was able to taxi off the runway. But if you're far, far to the left, and now you're having to bank, that is a problem. The thing is when you bank your aircraft, you lose a lot of altitude because your wings aren't lifting you up. And the easiest way to explain this, and I've explained it many times, is when you're driving in a car and you put your hand out the window, because as a kid, I always used to do that. But if you put your hand out the window like this and it's level and you have it slightly pitched up, what happens is the wind is pushing underneath your hand and it's wanting to push your hand up in the air. But if you have your hand at an angle like this, it's not really wanting to push your hand up as much as wanting to push it to the side, right? So if you have your plane banked like this, The wind that's coming at your plane isn't pushing you up, it's pushing you to the side, and it's no longer helping your plane get away from the ground. So by banking, you start to lose the lift of your aircraft, and which means you're going to have to descend to keep the speed going because the propeller is no longer working. So by doing a very aggressive bank, you lose altitude very quickly, which is not what you want to be doing. Something to listen to when you're a passenger is if you're in a really long banking turn, sometimes you'll hear the engines rev up, and they do that because the plane is going to need to be continuing to go faster in order to hold that angle because the wings aren't generating the same amount of lift, so it needs to add more speed in order to hold that altitude there. So next time you're in a really long banking turn, listen for those engines to rev up a little bit, and that's why that's happening. Now it's my guess that the engines start to go here, and the pilot initially starts to turn left. My guess is, and this is just strictly as a guess because I saw the other plane turning to the right, my guess is that the procedures at this airport is once you get a couple hundred feet off the ground that you would turn left. The plane that looked like it was on the right-hand runway was turning to the right. So my guess is that that's the normal procedure, which automatically is going to be your muscle memory. If that's what you've been doing is climbing up and turning left, that's going to be your obvious choice is to turn left because that's what you're supposed to do. But as you look to the left, you realize there's nowhere for this pilot to go. This is really one of the worst case scenarios that you can have in a small single engine aircraft is be just taking off because you have no speed, no momentum, and no altitude. So you don't have really a lot of things to trade. You're low to the ground, you don't have a lot of speed, and so there's really not much you can do. So let's look at the options that they have here. The left over here does not look very good. Straight ahead is okay, but the pilot looks and sees this field to the right and makes their decision to commit as that is the safest place they feel to go. There's two things that the pilot did here that I really liked. And the first one was making a decision quickly. They didn't have a lot of choice because they were low to the ground, so they looked around, they found those were their options, left, straight ahead, or to the right, and they chose pretty quickly, hey, let's go to the right. Now they could have landed straight, there were some options that land straight, but they made their decision. And I can't fault anybody for making a decision and then acting on it quickly, which is the second thing that they did very well. They made the decision, okay, let's go here, and they committed to it. They didn't change or guess, or it doesn't look like it based off of what was going on. The plane just aimed straight for that field there and headed straight towards that. Now, if you make a decision and you make the wrong decision, you can learn from that. But something in aviation and a lot of things in life is hesitating to make any decision at all. You can't learn from that, and that will get you in a lot more trouble than making a bad decision. This is actually another view that's looking at the wing, and you can see how much the wing goes down. Now, initially they go to the left, and then when he turns to the right, you can see how much altitude they continue to lose here. Now, of course, this is something easy for you to analyze or for me to analyze because we're not in the situation. Now, if you have this situation, you're going to get a massive surge of adrenaline, as you can imagine, and so you're going to be more aggressive on the controls than if you're in a simulated engine failure. You're not at risk of losing your life. But I think if the pilot had taken a shallower turn to the right, they would have actually made it up to this flat grass area here and had a much better landing. Of course, the other alternative would be to contact air traffic control, say unable a few times, and then say something like, we're going to end up in the Hudson. But since we don't have the air traffic control audio for this video, we don't know what he really said. Jokes aside, you can see from this angle here, they actually safely made it onto land. The plane stayed more or less intact. It was clearly damaged, but hopefully the pilot was okay. These are really split-second decisions that a pilot has to make, and unfortunately, when you're newer and you're flying a small single-engine aircraft like this, you don't have a lot of options. You're low to the ground, you're slow, and you're only got a couple hundred feet and a couple seconds to make a decision on where you want to land. What that pilot told me that I will never forget is, if you lose your engine low to the ground, just land straight ahead. It doesn't really matter what's in front of you. You're better off to just land straight. Because he watched a guy, he was sitting out on the runway, he watched this guy take off, he heard the engine sputter, so he looked up, and when he looked up, he saw this guy try to make a really steep turn to get back to the runway. By making that really steep turn, remember I told you about if you bank too much, the wings start to lose lift? Well, he banked so much, the wings lost all their lift, and he basically just came straight out of the sky and pancaked into the ground. Now, had he landed forward, even if he was in a busy area, because I think it was in like the LA area, he's going to be landed forward on a road or hit some trees or whatever, or a golf course like Harrison Ford did. Even if he had done any of those things, the plane would have been totaled. That's true, but he probably would have lived. By trying to get back to the runway, he actually ended up killing himself. So keep in mind, when you're out there, you kind of have to play these scenarios out, even though they're kind of dark. But play this scenario out. You lose your engine here, what would you do? And if it's straight ahead, you have to realize that that's a sacrifice you have to make. If you're only a couple hundred feet off the ground and you try to turn your plane really aggressively like that, the chances are you making it back, it's not going to work. You have a taxiway or something like that that you can land on, great. Or land straight ahead and roll off the end of the runway at 20 knots, that's not a big deal. At the end of the day, this pilot did a really great job. I think that they were okay. The plane was probably totaled, but that's fine. You can get a new plane, it's hard to get a new you. And as you watch the plane hit the ground, realize how slow they're actually going. It's kind of like being in a bad car crash, which people survive all the time. In one of these worst case scenarios here, I think the pilot did a great job. The person who sent me this sent it and asked, was this like a life-threatening thing? The pilots just took off into a storm like in the movie Flight? And the thing you have to realize is that air traffic control in the tower there, before they clear you for takeoff, they can see the weather outside their windows and they have a radar to see what's going on around them. So they can see what's going on out there and they're not going to just fire a plane off into the sky into the middle of a terrible storm. But the other thing that's more important than air traffic control is that we as pilots have a radar in front of us. In a really stormy day, we'll have this radar up and we'll line up on the runway and we'll look at this radar. This radar shows us the level of water that's in the clouds, so we really know if it's safe or not to take off. Now, if you as a pilot line up on the runway and you look at your radar and it looks bad, even if air traffic control clears you for takeoff, you don't have to go. You can look out there and go, hey, we see a massive cell in front of us, we don't want to go, and I've done that and I've heard other pilots do that. Now, even if air traffic control is annoyed by that, it doesn't really matter. They're sitting in their tower or on the ground, you're about to take off. So if you don't think it looks good, you're not going to go. And that's what I want you as a passenger to realize. If the pilots are taking off here, they know what they're getting into and they're making a decision, hey, I feel good about going, let's go ahead and go. But there's something that you may not have noticed in this video, and that's this thing right here. Typically, you'll never see this up unless the plane is trying to slow down or the wings are usually trying to get rid of lift, which happens during landing. And that's exactly what was happening. That pilot had the controls in trying to get that left wing to lose lift. If you had looked at the other wing, it would have looked more like this. Now this is obviously the same wing, but this is what that other wing would have looked like. My guess is that the wind was coming from the left-hand side, which meant the left wing was getting a lot more lift. By the pilot putting in controls, what he's doing is he put the controls in to say, hey, left wing, I don't want as much lift as you're giving me. So I have the controls in here to help it reduce the amount of lift so it matches the same amount of lift on the right wing. Because when you take off, just like when you land, you want to have your wings level with the ground. It seems that the pilot maybe had too much of a control input in here, because you'll notice as they actually come off the ground, that left wing starts to go towards the ground and then they're fighting to keep the wings level as they climb away from the ground. If you put too much control in, what will happen is as the plane takes off, you're telling that left wing, I want less lift out of you, and now your right wing is getting a lot more lift. So you take off and what happens? Your left wing loses lift and it goes towards the ground and your right wing goes up. Now you have another problem. So what you'll have to do is put in enough control that the left wing isn't getting any more lift than the right wing, and then as your plane speeds up, sometimes you have to filter or change the amount of control or input that you're putting in there, because as plane starts to speed up, it's going to react a little bit differently. How much control do you need to put in there? As my flight instructor said, which I hated all the time, when I asked him how much rudder do I need to have in when I do a crosswind landing, he would say, oh, just enough. I hated that answer. I needed an exact number, but that's really the right answer, just enough. And that's what you have to do here. I recently was taking off and this pilot had more control input into the wing than I thought was good. She had the control in, I thought, man, that seems like an aggressive amount. Even though it was a really windy landing or a takeoff, I thought that seems like maybe too much. And I knew that the wing was actually doing exactly what you see here. And I thought, well, let's see what happens. I was sitting in the third seat So for me, I was watching her do this and I thought, you know, it doesn't look aggressive, and I'm looking at the instrument display to see that the wings are level as we're going down the runway. So I thought, okay, well, it seems like nothing worth really saying at this point. And we took off and we climbed out and the wings were level. Eventually she kind of rolled it out and it worked fine. But if you have the controls in a lot, you will see that go up. Now you should only see that on a windy day. If you're seeing that on a very calm day, then the pilot's doing something weird up there. Now this is a funny one because at first I thought, oh, it looks like it's a windy day. But luckily the videographer got the windsock right here. And in the video, we can see that the winds are actually pretty light and coming from the left-hand side. Now I think one of my worst landings ever, and I still remember it to this day, was at the regionals. I went into Newark and it was a spine crusher. I mean, I pounded that landing in. It was very swirly winds. I was fighting the plane all the way to the ground. I pulled the power out probably too soon, didn't flare enough. I did all the things wrong and I pounded that in. I mean, embarrassingly pounded that in. And it was a one-day trip. I was relatively new, maybe 3 months at the regionals. I pounded it in and there was, I think, 4 legs. So the captain had 2 legs and I had 2 legs. That was my first leg with him. And all I was thinking about on his leg and my next leg is, I need to redeem myself so this guy doesn't go home thinking, how did this guy even get here? But luckily pilots have excuses for everything. And so we say, I don't focus as hard on a really calm day. So that's usually when my landings are my worst. So we have an excuse for everything. So let's see what this pilot's excuse is for flying and having this bad landing on a calm day. So it looks like the pilots are actually cheating a little bit upwind at the start here. And all that means is that what the pilots are doing is actually cheating a little bit to the left side, which is where the wind is coming from. They're cheating a little bit to the left side, so as they come in and actually touch down, the plane actually gets pushed into the middle of the runway. Now you can do that on smaller planes. You can't really do that on a larger aircraft. I mean, you could, but it's not typically normal. But you can do that on a smaller plane. You just cheat a little bit, and that way if the plane does go down and land a little bit left to the runway, it's not a big deal. As your plane gets bigger, your tires get obviously wider, and as they get wider, if you're too far left, you're going to be eating up the runway lights over there, which your chief pilot is not going to be happy about. Now you see they're a little bit to the left here. And as they get towards the ground, the wind starts pushing them to the right, which I guess is part of their original plan. But at a certain point, the pilot realizes we're going too far to the right, and so he puts the left wing down. And when that left wing goes down to get them back to the middle of the runway, their left tire hits the ground. If there's one habit that I wish I knew back when I was going through flight school and knew that I'd end up flying 747s, which never my wildest dreams that I imagined would happen, but if I knew that that was coming, as soon as I got good landing the way they got it taught in flight school, which is almost exactly like this, land with your wing into the wind and your left tire would land first, then your right tire, then your nose. That's the way I got taught. If I knew though on bigger planes that you had to land with your mains and your wings level to the ground, what I would have done is, as I got comfortable landing the way that I got taught, so that way I could get the plane on the runway regardless of how windy it was, I would have started doing things like landing level, so that way I didn't have any problems as I got later on in bigger planes. And I didn't really have any issues, but I did have a few bumpy landings at the very beginning because I was making that correction of trying to land with a little bit of my wing into the wind. The problem here is that if you do this type of landing that this pilot does in a large aircraft, it's going to make everybody on the flight deck very uncomfortable. You see that when the plane starts to go left, the momentum carries it to the left, because the bank was so aggressive, which means now they're going to have to bring the right wing down and then the right tire touches. Now the plane kept down the middle of the runway, and really at the end of the day there was nothing that was unsafe about the way that this got done. It just would have been not ideal to be having a bunch of left movement and a bunch of right movement really close to the ground like that. If you're doing that on a larger aircraft, it's going to be a bigger problem. There's a video that I have of an A380 doing something very similar to that, because the momentum is a lot more, it looks more aggressive. If you want to see an A380 having almost the same type of landing, check out this video here. And if you want to see some pilots getting along with air traffic control, Kind of. Check out this video up here. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.